Still remember the sound of the gravel under Ethan's boots the day he came back. It was slow, hesitant. Nothing like the confident steps he used to take when this ranch felt like his whole world. The sun was low behind him, turning him into a shadow before I could see his face, and for a moment I thought my heart would stop the way it used to when he was a boy running toward me after school. A year earlier, that same road had carried him away from me. The day he tried to take the ranch didn't begin with shouting. It began with silence. He walked into my kitchen with papers in his hand, eyes colder than I had ever seen. Olivia stood behind him, arms crossed like a lawyer waiting for a verdict she already believed she had won. "Mom, we need to talk," he said. I knew something was wrong the moment he didn't kiss my cheek. The coffee on the stove burned while he explained how the ranch needed to be modernized, how I was too old to make decisions, how transferring control to him was the smart financial move. His words sounded rehearsed, polished, like they belonged to someone else's mouth. When I refused to sign, Olivia stepped forward. "You're being emotional," she said, her voice sweet but sharp enough to cut. I remember gripping the back of my chair just to stay steady. "Your father built this place with his hands," I told Ethan. "And I kept it alive after he died. I'm not handing it over because someone thinks I'm inconvenient." He didn't yell. That hurt more than anything. He just looked disappointed, as if I were a problem to be solved. The next weeks were a blur of tension. Calls from lawyers, messages from relatives telling me to be reasonable. Ethan stopped visiting unless a lawyer came with him, and every conversation felt like a negotiation. The night he told me he might contest the will was the night something inside me broke. I sat alone on the porch long after they drove away, watching the fields move in the wind like an ocean I could no longer cross. People say betrayal feels like anger. For me, it felt like emptiness. I started locking doors I had never locked before. I stopped cooking his favorite meals. I stopped waiting for his truck to appear at the end of the road. The legal fight never fully happened. Instead, life unfolded in a way none of us expected. Ethan and Olivia moved to the city, chasing investments that sounded impressive but felt hollow. The ranch stayed quiet. Some mornings I woke convinced I heard him laughing near the barn, only to realize it was just memory playing tricks on me. Loneliness changes the way you see time. Days stretch long, but months disappear without warning. I worked harder than I should have, mending fences, managing accounts, proving to myself that I was still capable. One evening I found one of Ethan's old baseball gloves tucked behind a shelf in the tech room. It was cracked and dusty, but when I slipped my hand inside it, I could almost hear his younger voice, asking if he had done well enough. That night I cried for the first time since he left. A year passed before the phone call came. "Mom," he said, and I knew immediately something had shattered inside him. He didn't ask for money, he didn't argue. He just asked if he could come see me. I agreed because no matter how strong you pretend to be, a mother never truly stops hoping. When he arrived, I barely recognized him. The confidence that once filled the air around him had faded into something quieter. He stood by the gate like he was waiting for permission to breathe. We sat at the kitchen table, and for a while neither of us spoke. The ticking clock sounded louder than ever. I thought I knew what I was doing. He finally said, "Olivia said we needed to take control before everything slipped away." "And now?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "Now I realize I was trying to take something that was never mine." His voice cracked, and the boy I raised surfaced through the man he had become. Forgiveness didn't arrive instantly. It crept in slowly, like dawn after a long winter night. I let him stay, but I set boundaries he had never heard from me before. He worked in the fields again, hands blistered, shoulders aching. At first he barely spoke, as if words might reopen wounds. One afternoon I watched him repairing a fence his father had built decades earlier. The sun hit his face in a way that made him look young again, and I realized that regret had softened him more than any lecture ever could. We didn't talk about Olivia for weeks. When he finally mentioned her, it was with a quiet sadness instead of anger. Their business deals had collapsed. The people they trusted disappeared the moment the money did. I kept thinking if I could just make everything bigger, faster, better. He said one night as we watched the stars. I thought success meant control. And now? I asked. Now I just want peace. Peace sounded simple, but it took effort. There were mornings when old resentment rose like dust in the air, making it hard to breathe. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if letting him back in would break me again. Slowly, routines returned. We shared meals without tension. He laughed at small things, like the way the dog chased shadows across the yard. The ranch felt alive again, not because ownership changed, but because understanding did. One evening he stood beside me at the fence line and said, "Don't want your keys anymore." The words surprised me more than any apology. "I just want to earn the right to stand here," he added. Trust rebuilds quietly. It's not a grand moment. It's dozens of small choices that stack on top of each other until fear loses its grip. Months later he moved into a small house in town, insisting he needed to learn how to stand on his own. He still visited every week, sometimes just to sit on the porch without speaking. The ranch stayed in my name, and for the first time I didn't feel guilty about that. We learned how to be family again without ownership defining us. Sometimes he would bring his child to visit, and watching him kneel down to tie those tiny shoes reminded me that people can change if they truly want to. One night, as we watched the sunset bleed across the fields, he said, "I used to think regret was punishment. Now I think it's a teacher." I nodded because I finally understood that love isn't about giving everything away. It's about knowing what to protect so that love itself can survive. Years may pass, and the gravel road will keep carrying us forward. The ranch will outlive both of us someday. But the lesson Ethan learned, and the strength I found when I refused to surrender my life, will remain long after the fences fall and the fields change hands. And sometimes, when the wind moves through the trees just right, I hear echoes of the past and feel grateful that losing almost everything taught us how to breed what truly mattered. The seasons kept turning, the way they always do out here, without asking permission from anyone. Spring came softly that year, with rain that soaked deep into the soil, as if the land itself was healing alongside us. Ethan started coming by more often again, not because I asked him to, but because he wanted to. He would arrive early in the morning, sometimes before I was fully awake, and start helping without a word. I could hear the sound of tools, the steady rhythm of work, and it brought a strange comfort I hadn't felt in a long time. There were still awkward moments. Times when our eyes met and old memories rushed back, arguments we never finished, words we could never take back. But we didn't run from those moments anymore. We let them exist, like scars that no longer bleed, but still remind you where you've been hurt. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old storage shed, Ethan found a wooden box his father had carved decades ago. Inside were letters, receipts, photographs, and small handwritten notes about the ranch. Notes about weather patterns, mistakes he'd made, things he'd learned the hard way. Ethan sat on the floor reading them, his back against the wall, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick. "Dad never wanted it to be about money." "No," I said. "He wanted it to be about responsibility." Ethan nodded slowly, as if something finally clicked into place. He packed the box carefully and carried it into the house, placing it on the table like something sacred. That night, he stayed late, and we went through the letters together. We laughed at old stories, cried at others, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were grieving the same loss together, instead of separately. News from the city eventually reached us through mutual acquaintances. Olivia had moved on quickly, attaching herself to another opportunity, another promise. When Ethan heard, he didn't react the way I expected. There was no anger, no bitterness, just acceptance. "I think I needed to lose her to find myself again," he said quietly. I didn't say anything. Some realizations need silence to settle. As time passed, people in town started noticing the change in him. They stopped whispering. They started nodding again when he walked by. Reputation, I learned, isn't rebuilt through explanations, it's rebuilt through consistency. One evening, Ethan asked if he could bring his son to stay the weekend. I hesitated, fear rising like a reflex, but I agreed. When the boy arrived, wide-eyed and curious, something inside me softened instantly. He ran across the yard laughing, chasing the dog just like Ethan used to. Watching Ethan watch his child was something I'll never forget. He didn't take a single moment for granted. He listened. He knelt down. He apologized when he lost patience. He was present in a way he never had been before. That night, after the boy fell asleep, Ethan sat beside me on the porch steps. "I used to think being strong meant never backing down," he said. "Now I think it means knowing when you were wrong." I looked at him and realized that the man beside me was no longer the son who tried to take my ranch. He was someone shaped by loss, regret, and effort. Someone still learning but willing. The ranch didn't change much after that. The fences stood where they always had. The land continued to demand care and respect. But the feeling of it changed. It no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like home again. There were days when Ethan would ask for advice, not about money or ownership but about life, about patience, about trust, and I would answer honestly, no longer afraid that my guidance would be used against me. Years from now I know people will talk about what happened. They'll simplify it into a lesson about power or inheritance. But the truth is quieter than that. It's about a mother who refused to disappear, a son who learned too late, but not too late, and a place that stood still long enough for both of us to find our way back. Sometimes, in the early mornings, I sit alone with my coffee and listen to the land wake up. Birds calling, wind moving through grass, and I think about how close I came to losing myself trying to hold on to love the wrong way. I didn't lose my ranch that year. But more importantly, I didn't lose my soul, and neither did my son. The summer that followed felt quieter than any before it. Not empty, just calm in a way I had forgotten was possible. Ethan began coming over without announcing himself, the way he used to when he was younger, like the ranch was still part of his bones, and not just a place he visited. Sometimes he brought groceries, sometimes tools, sometimes nothing at all except a willingness to sit beside me and watch the sky change colors at sunset. One evening, after a long day repairing the old fence near the creek, he stayed longer than usual. We sat on the porch, 2 mugs of coffee growing cold between our hands. He looked tired, but not the restless tired I remembered from before. This was a quieter exhaustion, the kind that comes from rebuilding yourself piece by piece. "Mom," he said, staring at the horizon, "do you ever stop being afraid that someone you love will leave again?" I thought about the question for a long time. "No," I said finally. "You don't stop being afraid, you just learn to live anyway." He nodded slowly, as if the answer was heavier than he expected. Life began settling into a new rhythm. The ranch wasn't just a symbol of conflict anymore, it became a shared responsibility again, though the boundaries remained clear. Ethan never asked for the keys. Not once. And I never offered them. There was peace in that unspoken agreement, a respect that had been missing before. One afternoon in early autumn, we hosted a small gathering for the neighbors. Nothing extravagant, just music, food, and laughter under the open sky. I watched Ethan talking with people he had once avoided, apologizing quietly where needed, helping where he could. No speeches, no dramatic gestures, just steady actions that slowly repaired what had been broken. At some point during the evening, a woman approached me. She had been at the wedding months ago, one of the guests who had witnessed everything. She smiled gently and said, "You look lighter now." I realized she was right. I wasn't carrying the same weight anymore. Not because everything had been fixed, but because I had stopped trying to control what wasn't mine to control. Winter arrived early that year. The cold settled into the walls of the house, and the fire became the center of our evenings. Ethan and his son came by often, bringing laughter that filled rooms that had once echoed with silence. The boy loved listening to stories about his grandfather, about the horses, about the land. Sometimes he would sit on my lap, tracing the lines on my hands as if they were maps. One night, after putting him to bed in the guest room, Ethan lingered in the kitchen. He looked at the keys hanging around my neck, then quickly looked away. "I don't want them," he said suddenly. "I hadn't asked." "I know," I replied softly. "I used to think they were power," he continued. "Now I think they're responsibility. And I'm not ready for that yet. Maybe one day, but not now." I felt a quiet relief settle over me. Not because he refused the keys but because he finally understood what they meant. Time kept moving. carrying us forward whether we were ready or not. The wounds between us never completely disappeared, but they stopped defining every conversation. We learned how to talk about simple things again: weather, neighbors, the way the moon looked over the fields at night. One rainy afternoon, while organizing old boxes in the attic, I found a photograph from years ago. Ethan was small, standing beside his father, holding a toy cowboy hat that was far too big for him. His smile was fearless, certain that the world would always make sense. I brought the photo downstairs and placed it on the table. When Ethan saw it, he laughed softly. "I thought life was simple back then." "It never was," I said. "You just hadn't seen enough yet." He stayed quiet for a while, then added, "I wish I could go back and stop myself from hurting you." "You can't," I told him gently. "But you can decide who you are now." That seemed to stay with him. Years later, people might say that everything ended neatly, that forgiveness solved everything. But that's not how real life works. Forgiveness didn't erase what happened. It didn't give us back the time we lost or the trust that cracked. What it gave us was space to rebuild something different, something quieter but stronger. Some mornings I still wake up early and walk through the house alone, touching the walls, listening to the echoes of the past. I don't feel anger anymore when I think about that wedding or the fights that followed. I feel something closer to gratitude. Not for the pain itself, but for the clarity it forced me to find. The ranch remains what it has always been: a witness. To love, to mistakes, to growth. And sometimes, when the sun sets just right and the sky turns the same shade of royal blue as the dress I once wore, Ethan sits beside me and says nothing at all. We don't need many words anymore, because the truth is simple. He came back with regret, yes, but he also came back willing to change. And in the quiet space between us, that has been enough.